The World Order: Our Secret Rulers by Eustace Mullins.
Foreword. When he was proffered the cup of hemlock by his fellow citizens, Socrates' last words were, "Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius, will you remember to pay the debt?" A gentleman is responsible for his obligations, and this book is the repayment of the efforts of three great men who chose me as their protégé: Ezra Pound, the dominant literary figure of our time; George Stimson, the most respected journalist in Washington, the title has been vacant since his death; and H.L. Hunt, whose spectacular business success blinded the public to his brilliant philosophical achievements. It was H.L. Hunt who invented the term, the mistaken, for the self-corrupted members of the new class who now control our world. He might have added that they could also be described as the misshapen, because of their warped and perverted sense of values. The present work is also an expression of another Greek attitude: gratitude for life. Michael Lakakis introduced this astounding Greek attribute to me some 30 years ago. I describe it as astounding, because no one today thinks of being grateful for life. Who can conceive of gratitude for life, in an existence of eternal and worldwide slavery imposed upon humanity by the minions of the world order? In The Greek Way, Edith Hamilton says, "Tragedy was a Greek creation because in Greece thought was free." We do not have tragedy today because of the thought control imposed by the world order. Instead, we have newspeak and doublethink in the world of 1984. I was privileged to sit in on a number of conversations between Edith Hamilton and Ezra Pound, in which the conversation was uninhibited and far-reaching freedom of thought in a federal institution in which one of the talkers was held as a political prisoner. Pound describes these talks in The Cantos. Finally, we have Edith Hamilton's rendering of Socrates' most notable admonition: "Agree with me if it seem to you to speak the truth, or, if not, withstand me might and main, that I may not deceive you as well as myself in my desire, and like the bee leave my sting in you before I die." And now let us proceed, and they want to know what we talked about. De one iteris et de armis, praestontibus congeniis. Nietzsche also discoursed on tragic pleasure, which no longer exists, because the world order, in its anxiety to maintain control of every aspect of our lives, has banned passion. As a poor substitute, it gives us drugs and degeneracy. There are many facts in this book which you, the reader, will not wish to accept. I ask you to accept nothing, but to make your own investigations. You may find even more astonishing true facts than I have managed to glean in 35 years of intensive and in-depth research. Eustace Mullins, November 1, 1984. Preface to second edition. My search for the names and addresses of the secret rulers of the world became a medieval quest to find the Holy Grail which would fling open the doors of freedom for the oppressed and betrayed peoples of the world, particularly those in my own country. These world order minions fear exposure more than they fear armed force or a legal system which would punish them for their crimes against humanity. I discovered that the hidden manipulators of the world QRDER had maintained their power by a very simple technique, which I have likened to a masked ball. The bal mask enables the Gnostics, the knowing ones, to identify their friends and enemies because they alone know who is wearing what costume. It is a masquerade which depends entirely upon disguise, that is, on things which are not what they seem. H. T. Martineau wrote in 1833, in Three Ages, 1.1, a troop of gentlemen, whose country could not be divined from their complexions, since each wore a mask; persons whose country cannot be divined from their complexions. Bandits wore a mask to prevent their victims from identifying them. The bandits of the world order have succeeded in robbing the whole world through the technique of the bal mask, the disguise which enables them to carry on their satanic work without being identified and prosecuted. The bal mask is the ideal vehicle for this program, because the world order gained its present power in Europe of the 19th century. It was a truism among the old European aristocracy that balls are given for those who are not invited. The guests attend because of duty or career, to spend an evening in the company of boring persons when they would much rather be elsewhere. The reward of being a guest at a bal mask is to be one of the knowing ones, those who know which mask hid the face of the king, which costume is that of the Grand Vizier. The other guests never knew whether they were talking to a mere courtier, or to a powerful personage. The masses, with their faces pressed against the windows of the ballroom, know none of the celebrants, and will never know. This is the technique of the world order, to be masked in mystery, with its hierarchy protected by their anonymity and their masks, so that those who revolt will strike out against the wrong targets, insignificant officials who are expendable. The world order record is one of horror, as the ghosts of the massacred billions cry out for retribution. Its true nature is described by that master of the macabre, Edgar Allan Poe, in The Masque of the Red Death. While the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had corn like a thief in the night. And one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. What Poe depicts is what is actually happening to the present world under the ministrations and conspiracies of the world order: increasing pollution, disease and famine ending in worldwide desolation and the disappearance of our species. Fatis the alternative, we can survive by ripping the mask off of the face of the Red Death, and by sending him back to that hell from which he came. God made the earth for the jiving, and we are overdue in our attack on the Brotherhood of Death. We must not be inveigled into more contrived wars for the profit of the world order, nor can we afford to continue to be misled by their control over the media, the educational process, and our governmental institutions. Table of Contents. Chapter 1. The New World Order. Chapter 2. The Rothschilds. Chapter 3. Soviet Russia. Chapter 4. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Chapter 5. The Business of America. Chapter 6. The CIA. Chapter 7. The Bechtel Complex. Chapter 8. The Foundations. Chapter 9. The Rule of the Order. Chapter 1. The New World Order. In 1985, as a sequel to the history of the Federal Reserve System, this writer published The World Order as a compendium of additional information on this subject. It never occurred to me to call it the New World Order because my researchers had traced its depredations back for some 5,000 years. Perhaps in response to the exposés in this volume, the spokesman for the Brotherhood of Death went public with their claims for a New World Order, which essentially was the brave New World described by Aldous Huxley in his groundbreaking novel. Behind all demands for this new order were the same imperatives, as listed by Professor Stanley Hoffman, in Primacy or World Order. What will have to take place is a gradual adaptation of the social, economic, and political system of the United States to the imperatives of world order. As Professor Hoffman points out, the United States is the primary target of the missiles of the New World Order because it still one retains, however perverted and distorted, the essential machinery for a republic which provides for the freedom of its citizens. The order's present goals were originated by Lord Castlereagh at the Congress of Vienna in 1815, when he handed over Europe to the victorious money power, as exemplified by the presence of the House of Rothschild. THIS was the balance of power, which was never a balance of power at all, but rather a worldwide system of control to be manipulated at the pleasure of the conspirators. Henry Kissinger has been busily reviving this program for renewed control, as he wrote in a think piece for Newsweek, January 28, 1991, "We now face a new balance of power." Today, it translates into the notion of a new world order, which would emerge from a set of legal arrangements to be safeguarded by collective security. When minions of the world order such as Henry Kissinger call for collective security, what they are really seeking is a protective order behind which they can safely carry out their depredations against all mankind. This was very reluctantly identified by President George Bush, after months of dodging questions about the New World Order, which he had publicly called for, when he finally stated it really was a United Nations peacekeeping force. This took us back to the Second World War, which produced the United Nations. Walter Millis, in Road to War, America 1914–17, further removed this program to the First World War, when he wrote, "The Colonel's Edward Mandell House sole justification for preparing such a bath of blood for his countrymen was his hope of establishing a new world order of peace and security as a result." Note the call for security. Once again, this is the cry of the international criminals for protection as they carry out the universal work of sabotage and destruction. House had first laid out the program for this world order in his book, Philip Drew Administrator, in which Drew, House himself, became the guiding force behind the government and directed it to the goals of world order. The same forces set up a Second World War, from which the United Nations emerged as the new guarantor of collective security. Random House Dictionary tells us that the United Nations was created in Washington January 2, 1942, when 26 nations allied against the Axis, or fascist powers. In the American language, H.L. Mencken says that President Roosevelt coined the term, United Nations, in conference with Prime Minister Winston Churchill at the White House in December of 1941, on the eve of the Pearl Harbor attack which manipulated us into World War II. The United Nations became an active entity at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in 1944, when Great Britain, the United States and Russia set it in motion as a financial dictator. If the United Nations was created to fight fascism, its mission ended in 1945, when fascism was defeated by military force. Fascism derives its name from the bundle of rods which ancient Roman officials carried into court to punish offenders. Thus, fascism historically means law and order, the rule of law, and the intent to punish criminals. This, of course, is what the conspirators of the world order wish to avoid at all costs. The Oxford English Dictionary defines fascism as one of a body of Italian nationalists which was organized in 1919 to oppose communism in Italy. Other definitions state simply that the fascists were organized to fight Bolshevism. Thus the United Nations essentially was set up to battle against anti-communists, as exemplified by Germany, Italy and Japan. When this goal was successful in 1945, the United Nations no longer had a historic mission. Nevertheless, it continued to function, and the Rockefellers donated the most expensive parcel of real estate in Manhattan for its world headquarters. It was against this background that the Governor of New York, Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, addressed a meeting at the Sheraton Park Hotel on July 26, 1968, in which he called for the creation of a new world order. Rockefeller ignored the fact that it was Adolf Hitler who had preempted this title as "My New Order" for Europe. The phrase was an attractive one to our politicians, as President Bush revealed when he addressed Congress on September 11, 1990, in a speech carried nationally on television, in which he called for a new world. A world quite different from the one we have known. A new world order. He continued to reiterate this demand in subsequent addresses on television, declaring on January 29, 1991 in his annual State of the Union address, "It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind, peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law." He repeated this tocsin on February 1, 1991 in 3 separate addresses on the same day, in which he emphasized the New World Order call. He modestly refrained from pointing out that it was not a new phrase, and that it had been adopted by Congress in 1782 for the Great Seal of the United States, the incomplete pyramid with its occult eye, and the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum beneath it, identifying this nation as committed to a new world order or a new order for the ages, which apparently depended upon pyramid power for its fulfillment. This symbol dated from 1779, when Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Illuminati sect, formulated a program remarkably similar to that of the world order conspirators today. Weishaupt called for 1. Abolition of all monarchies and all ordered governments. 2. Abolition of private property and inheritances. 3. Abolition of patriotism and nationalism. 4. Abolition of family life and the institution of marriage, and the establishment of communal education for children. 5. Abolition of all religion. It was hardly accidental that the Rothschilds, when they hired Karl Marx and the League of Just Men to formulate a program, received the Communist Manifesto of 1848, which contained the above formula. Weishaupt's activists had taken over the Freemason movement in 1782, which then became one of the vehicles for the enactment of this program. Its true origin in ancient Oriental despotism was revealed on the editorial page of the Washington Post January 5, 1992, when philosopher Nathan Gardels warned that the ideal area for the New World Order would be China, not the United States. Gardels points out that Marxism was a product of Western philosophy, i.e. Hegel, but that a world order would produce Oriental despotism. He supported his thesis with quotes from the Japanese Prime Minister, who complained that abstract notions of human rights should not interfere with foreign policy, and from Chinese leaders who denounced demands for independent liberty as garbage. President Bush modestly pointed out one of his aides, General Brent Scowcroft, as the author of the magical phrase, New World Order. People magazine, November 25, 1991 said, Scowcroft's influence first became evident last year, several weeks after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Again while fishing, he and Bush came up with the idea of a New World Order, an ambitious phrase meant to suggest a new United States foreign policy in the post-Cold War era. Who is Scowcroft? In Washington, he has been known for years as one of Henry Kissinger's ubiquitous lackeys, coming to prominence when he served Kissinger on the National Security Council. He then joined the firm of Kissinger Associates, of which he became president. Kissinger praises him in People's magazine, saying, "He's very unobtrusive, but he's tenacious as hell in fighting for his point of view. He's not a yes man." This was an amazing claim from Kissinger, who had never once heard a no from Scowcroft during all the years that he served him. People magazine also mentioned Scowcroft's lack of attention to the business at hand. Often teased for dozing during long, uneventful meetings, Scowcroft brushes off such twitting. The media was horrified to learn that President Reagan occasionally dozed during long, boring official presentations, but finds it excusable that Scowcroft, who is the present head of their National Security Council, might be expected to keep his wits about him, is guilty of the same offense. The excessively friendly media attitude towards Scowcroft is also reflected in Parade magazine, which enthused in the issue of December 15, 1991. Brent Scowcroft, 66, is a highly regarded military strategist who has never been tarred by the brush of scandal. Yes men rarely venture into scandalous situations.